What's up? Today I think I'm going to bring some reading of this book. This is 13 Cubed. This is more case studies of mind control programming. It's quite interesting. I can't find my other book that I'm looking for at this time that I want to read too that I've never read before, but that won't be long. It's just covered up somewhere in my room. This is a get my nicotine fix. I'm going to read from case 7, which is New World Religion, Viking in Canada. I know I got a lot of Canuck friends on here. JW Lifestyle. Let's get it a little closer. Get it right. Let's get this all right. I'm the oldest of 4 children. A girl born to parents that belonged to the Jehovah's Witness religion. My parents were afraid of anything new and anyone with education. I grew up not wanting to be like them. This was my life several decades ago. There was no computers or internet. I was grateful that my parents allowed me and my siblings to play with the children in our neighborhood. Jehovah's Witness parents were not supposed to allow their children to play with the neighborhood children. The Jehovah's Witness taught that other people were of the devil and would perish in Armageddon. The only reason we could be friendly with a non-believer is as if we thought we could interest them in joining the religion. The JW religion was a 24/7 lifestyle that included several obligations. For example, the congregation of 80 people came for a 2-hour meeting church service per week. The children from infant, toddler, and adolescents had to sit on the adult-sized wooden chairs beside their parents. There was no such a thing as a nursery or Sunday school for children. I have scant memories of attending the Jehovah's Witness meetings. I used to think that it was because I hated the meetings. Since I'm reading Stewart's works, it seems my blanking out could be related to programming. One thing I do remember is hearing the sermon about what happened to Jesus after he died. Even though I was only 6 or 8 years old, I felt myself silently disagreeing with their interpretation. As a teenager, I spent a lot of time at the library reading psychology books and trying to improve my life. One book said to write down every childhood memory back to infant, because these provide clues about why your life isn't the way it is, why your life is the way it is now. I did this writing when I was about 18 years old. I found out that I had very specific memories as a toddler, preschool age, etc. What amazed me is my memories What amazed me about my memories is that I had adult thoughts and opinions, even though I was in a toddler's body. This exercise made me realize that I had little memory of several childhood years. My maternal grandmother. My maternal grandmother is French-Irish background that lived with us when I was 2 years old. She was a kind person and a stabilizing force in our home. She had been separated from her husband, my maternal grandfather, for many years. When my grandmother was 18-year old, she did something that was considered shocking for a Catholic in the year 1911. She left her parents and 9 siblings, including a set of twin brothers, to marry a Protestant man. He was extremely handsome and about 15 years older than her. I can only imagine my grandmother was quite dazzled by his attention. My personal conjecture is that she got unexpectedly pregnant. I think that's the real reason she got married and moved out of our home city. My grandmother at age 64 had some ongoing heart problems and when she went to the hospital, even though I was just 2 years and 10 months old. Part of me must have recognized something that was happening because I do remember the details before receiving the phone call. It was my mother's birthday, and her sisters and cousins were there. The restaurant owner came over to our booth table telling us there's a phone call from the hospital. Too long a story to tell here, but when we arrived at the hospital, my grandmother had already passed on. I did the green spiral exercise to get more detail. Call me suspicious, but when I do this visualization, I keep seeing a man visiting. I keep seeing a visiting man in a white coat giving my grandmother a syringe. To me, it seems her demise was hastened prematurely and artificially. It was unfortunate that it was the weekend my father was out of town attending Jehovah's Witness convention. The green spiral staircase exercise is one where you imagine a green spiral staircase, and at the top of it is an event that you want to remember. So you travel up the staircase and you try to witness and get more details from a memory that you may not have. So it's an excellent. I don't know it exactly. I would have to look it up and put it back on here, but I'll try to do that. Going places with my father. My father often referred to me as his firstborn. He took me with him a lot of different places throughout the years. My younger siblings had often stayed home with my mother, also head of the JW congregation, had a daughter. What? Hold on. Also head of the Jehovah's Witness congregation, had a daughter. So my siblings and I would visit or sleep over at their house sometimes. I've done the green spiral exercise, some of the places he took me. I wrote down the detailed and released the memories. Part of me does not want to believe any of the bad things that took place or noted here. Some of the green spiral exercises had ritual related to firstborns and indenturing their souls to the Jehovah's Witnesses, poverty programming, etc. I also knew he kept a simple Masonic ring in his jewelry box. How I got my name. I'm named after a daughter from the McDonald family in Ontario. When my mother was 16 years old, she and her mother, my grandmother, lived with the McDonald family for about a year. My mother liked the McDonald's daughter as well as the girl's first name. My mother's my mother named me after that girl. I estimate the McDonald's girl was born in 1940. My mother told me that she was pregnant with me. Near term, her doctor would check. Her doctor asked her to check into the hospital. Dr. Shelton said she wanted to induce her birth a week early because he will be away on holiday the following week. My mother went into the hospital but no birth took place. A week later my mother had a normal birth and I was born. I was delivered by a different doctor named Dr. McDonald. Curious to note, my birthday is the same as my maternal grandmother's and her two brothers. Another part of my childhood that did not make sense was that my mother was constantly blaming me for anything. Here's an example. I was about 10 years old and it was time to wake up and get ready for school. I could not get my mother to wake up, so I just took it upon myself to get my two sisters up, age 5 and 7, ready for school. We three walked to school. When I got home from school, my mother was extremely angry with me and she says, "You should have woken me up." Each morning I had to spend 10 minutes trying to wake her up. I was so worried I couldn't get her to wake up that she would be mad at me when I got home from school. This was an ongoing situation. It was later in the years that I remember seeing her have quite a few drinks in the day. She was a drinker. Another unhealthy thing is that my mother would say almost every day, "Don't do it, it's too hard for you." At other times, my mother would like to chat in a friendly way with me. It made me very confusing for me to know what makes up a healthy relationship. I was grateful that my father took our family out ice skating and tobogganing and to the beach in the summer. Since my father worked for an airline, our family also got travel by plane for free until I was 11 years old. His employer decided to move its main operation to Montreal and offered him better pay and benefits. My father did not accept the transfer to Montreal. There are few good jobs available in our city. There are few good jobs available in our city, and this made life hard. Physical health issue. As a child, it felt that my upper teeth were clamped inward on one side. It felt uncomfortable 24/7. My body was uneven, and at times I felt my blood sugar wasn't stable. I had many maladies at different times. I did the green spiral exercise on some of these things to summarize my notes. As a child, I saw adults that do ritually purposely set me up to make me feel physically uncomfortable in my daily life. When I was an adult and working, I got my own orthodontic work done. My parents only believed in doctors and drugs. About age 20, I did visit a few doctors, and their solution was to do aggressive surgery on me or give me heavy drugs. It took courage, but I found alternative solutions on my own. I could have easily ended up debilitated or dead many times if I had agreed to their medical advice. I'm actually quite proud that I was able, along with divine help, to dissolve and resolve my health issue. Lonely life. It was a lonely life. Many relatives lived across country. My maternal grandmother was belligerent and inappreciative of my father's generous health. My maternal grandparents spoke Ukrainian only. We only spoke English. So for me, it was like having no relatives at all. The JW religion was unfriendly and offered no caring or kindness. We were told we should fear God, wait for judgment and Armageddon, so that life was just a waiting game. At age 17, I lay in bed and practiced breathing less and less. I knew that's all I had to do, and then life would end. As I fell asleep, I kept repeating over and over to myself, there must be some divine kindness somewhere, or else it doesn't make any sense to be alive. The next morning, I woke and felt like the most amazing experience. In my dream, an older man wearing a long cloak took me to several planets. I saw different kinds of humanoid people in different geography. I remember one planet looking in particular that had prehistoric looking woolly mammoths wandering around. I awoke feeling I had been on an exciting trip. I felt jubilee and my depression was lifted. About the time I was 18, my father quit the JW religion. He said it ruined his life. We were all glad not to be in it. However, about 15 more years, I often had nightmares about having to be in those meetings I hated. The JW teachings were also deliberately and lingered were debilitating and lingered with me for years. We were told miracles only happened in biblical times. We could never ask for divine assistance for anything. For example, if there was a relative very ill in the hospital, there was no help. As a young adult, I remember I had a tremendous desire to travel. I worked in a government office and traveled in the US and Canada as often as possible with a good friend, Florence. My boyfriend, Richard, was headed to Mexico with his friend on a backpack type of trip. We planned I would join them for the part of the trip. We visited Chichen Itza Pyramid and the Yucatan. We milled around the pyramid sometime together and sometimes individually. I don't remember noticing any tourists at the pyramids, but I do remember noticing these tan-skinned men with medium brown hair in ponytails walking around. What caught my attention is that they were also similar looking. I thought they must be close relatives of each other. In recent years, imagine my surprise, I read Stewart's book, Blue Blood, True Blood, Conflict and Creation. I saw the illustration on 162. Their faces looked like the illustration. They were just 5'6" tall. Richard's friend had decided to return from Canada. Richard and I took a long bus ride from Mexico to Lake Atitlan, Guatemala. At about 3 a.m. in our motel room, we were woken by a violent shaking. Pieces of plaster fell from the ceiling onto the floor. It was a major earthquake. The earthquake continued for 5 days with big intensity, especially at night. Many roads were made impassable by the earthquake. There was no phone communication for the rest of the world. For 5 nights, all the travelers slept on cots outside the motel courtyard. My boyfriend Richard and I had a big fight about nothing. We decided to split up in Guatemala. I know this is ridiculous. We should have stuck it out together until we were home safely. I found a tour operator man who did backroads adventures in travel in his Jeeps. I left Richard and traveled in this man's tour Jeep. It took about 5 days to drive from Guatemala to Mexico through back roads. Sometimes there were several travelers in the Jeep, sometimes I was the only passenger. We had to spend the night in the desert and in the middle of nowhere. There were no motels. The tour guide asked me if he should sleep inside the Jeep with me. I said no, so he slept on his Jeep roof. To my memory, he treated me in a respectful way. When I got back home to Canada, I learned that 20,000 people died in the earthquake in 1976 in Guatemala. The earthquake had been a 7.6 on the Richter scale. My experience of ending up in the desert in the middle of nowhere on my own does make me wonder if there was programming involved. My 9-month trip to Europe. A few years later, I met my boyfriend and husband, Dan, not his real name. We happened to work at the same government office. I was assigned as his assistant, which meant we worked together daily. It was 1979, and we decided to quit our jobs, travel to Europe, and work on a kibbutz. We worked on kibbutz Dorot for 6 months. It's located 8 miles away from Ashkelon, Israel. In recent years, I was surprised to read Stewart's book, Montauk, The Alien Connection. He writes that he worked on a different kibbutz named Gavara AM, which is 8 miles away. I really liked my kibbutz. They often took us volunteer trips to see sites in Israel. As we traveled, we saw a great deal of Israel on our own. Israel and Crete were some of my favorite places of the entire 9-month trip. Our kibbutz work ended when we continued on to Cairo, Egypt. We visited the Giza pyramids. Neither Dan nor I had studied about the pyramids. We just looked around and tried to guess what we were looking at. Remember, there was no internet in 1980. We went into the King's Chamber in Giza's main pyramid, and a couple of tourists stopped for a look and left. There were no other people. You could see graffiti on the stone walls from 1871. Dan was taking so long inside the King's Chamber, I decided to wait for him in the main area on the Giza Pyramid. I was getting bored with him when I saw a miniature passageway to the King's Chamber. The passageway was pure stone. I estimated about 4 feet high by 4 feet wide and at least 30 feet long. I was curious to know what was in the Queen's Chamber. Boredom kicked in. I bent over in half, ran through this claustrophobic, feels like no air along the tiny pathway to the King's Chamber. When I arrived in the Queen's Chamber, I saw it was a big empty room. The only way back to the entrance, my steps through that claustrophobic passage. This was not something I normally do. I'm not an athlete or a daredevil. After reading Stewart's book, I can only imagine there have been programming involved. Heading back home. Our 9-month trip was over, and it was time to go back to our home city on the prairies, Canada. The best prices for flights were at the Student Cuts office in Athens, Greece, where we were in line waiting to buy a flight ticket. We chatted with a young woman who arrived after us. She was she told us she was French Canadian. We bought a cheap airline ticket for a week in advance, Athens to Warsaw to Montreal, Canada. When we arrived in Montreal, we planned to book another flight to our home city. Coincidentally, we saw the woman again, named Diane, on the same flight that we were on. We three had also a 6 hour layover in Warsaw Airport, and we waited for our flight to connect to Montreal. Diane was friendly, and she told us we could stay with her friends at the house in Montreal. She said her friends love meeting new people, especially travelers. I did not want to go back home yet to my city. I would have to start job hunting soon as I got back, so we accepted Diane's invitation. The first night we arrived in Montreal, Dennis, age 30, took us out to a high-end Greek restaurant. I wondered how a young optometrist could afford this. Dennis and his girlfriend Nicole were friendly and treated us very nicely. We stayed with them 10 days in their roomy two-level older home. Diane stayed there too. Sometimes Diane was gone for a few days and sometimes she came back. However, after reading Stewart's material, this coincidental invitation seems suspect. I've done the green spiral exercise on this. I think Diane's job was to meet certain people and bring them back to Dennis's house in Montreal. Dan and I later married. Dan's parents were much older than other parents. My husband's mother had some kind of female health issue. The doctors recommended that a pregnancy would cure her problem. Dan's parents had already had two other teenage children. His parents took the doctor's advice and Dan was conceived. On the couch. In the 1990s, something strange happened. While lying on the couch face down in the afternoon, Dan on the other couch reading. Our children, 6 and 10 years old, were fooling around playing overly active game of tag. Several of the kids put their hands on my arms to shake me awake. They were complaining that the other siblings were being bad. My body felt like a sleep-induced anesthesia. I could hear the kids, but I could not move or speak. I wondered why my husband didn't stop this sibling rivalry. Next, I see I'm in a harness in a mini glass elevator. There were about 4 people beside me, also wearing harnesses similar to ride at a fair. Mini glass elevator rose vertically at top speed. I could see the planet becoming smaller beneath us. I felt myself starting to rouse in a deep slumber, found myself standing in a kind of massive-looking warehouse or airplane hangar. The sides of the building were very high. They were opening to a grayish indigo sky. There were large boxes against the walls. I was fearful that I could see there was no possible way to get out of here. It was impossible. At the same time, I noticed 2 men in a slim-fitting forms in neutral gray colors with a hood. These men stood with their backs to me, facing the wall. I heard them speak. The shorter man spoke. He felt like a lower-ranking officer. He said to the taller one, "Here she is. You want her. You wanted her?" The taller one, 6'3", rustled with intense energy. He felt like a commander. After a pause, the commander replied in a tense, terse manner, "She's not supposed to be here." I found myself back at the mini glass elevator returning to Earth. It was 1990s, and I made friends with a metaphysical group. It was the New Age. Spirit guides were the topic of the conversation. I was washing dishes in a galley-style kitchen when I heard the massive water buffalo. When I heard and felt a massive water buffalo image with a little woman riding on its back walk by. The image was clear bluish color. The buffalo was 5 foot high. I heard the clicking of the hooves on the kitchen floor. However, I felt suspicious of this image, was not sure why. Gradually, I had less contact with the group. More and more in conversation with Stewart, his opinion was that It was a satellite generated imagery. Other memories of this period of time is that I felt as if I had a hard 1 inch band on that was tightening. I felt this often. Where? I've asking my husband on several occasions to check my scalp to see if there was anything that would cause this. There was no obvious cause. Miscellaneous odd things that I've experienced. Dentist. As an adult, I noticed that I would relax so deeply and quickly over time, almost hypnotically in the chair. I could barely notice. I could barely reply to the dentist's question. Dentist. When I was 10 or 11, the dentist announced to my mother that I had 10 or 15 cavities. I noticed the tall dentist held little x-rays cupped in his hand below waist level. I think he was dishonest. There were no other people there with the exception of the receptionist. I ended up with a mouthful of silver amalgam as a child. I've had these fillings replaced in recent years as an adult. Learning. As a young teenager, I wondered if I had a learning disability issue where I would look at the teacher in the front of the classroom. I would forget in seconds that I was starting to write in my notebook on the desk. I had some type of disconnection. On the other hand, as an adult, I scored well with the majority of 15 categories on my employment aptitude test. Directions. It's hard for me. I usually get lost going from class to college. Mole. I had a mole that started growing on my forehead when I was 15. The mole kept increasing in size each decade. I thought about getting the mole removed. What spurred me to get it done was an article about a mole in the forehead being a mark of the Illuminati. Song. The song Wildflower from 1970s. Whenever I heard that song on the radio, I would listen so intently as if it were a patriotic anthem. I experienced this feeling for many years. My reaction. I worked at McDonald's part time while attending high school. Another student employee was walking about, accidentally bumped the burning hot fry basket into my bare arm. I was just working even though my arm was burning and hurting. I had a 2.5 inch pink scar for 20 years from that injury. In retrospect, it was strange that I did not ask to go home when I got injured. These were just some of my experiences. I think independent. I think an independent attitude of looking for. I think my independent attitude when looking for answers and seeking divine assistance helped me. However, many times I did not see things that were really as they really were. I wanted to see the positive in everything. This led me to poor decision making and hard times. Always seeking, I read a lot of books and explored many well known authors on the internet. I discovered Stuart Swerdler on YouTube in the last few years. I did not feel very healthy all the time. All I could do is figure that I had PTSD. Stuart did a health scan. My health information gave me pivotal in my life. I was able to improve my health as well as doing my own programming scan. At first, it is a shock to read it. I've referred to his books and videos in hyperspace, exercises on these life experiences. Janet's blogs and books are helpful, finding balance and insight. Both Stuart and Janet talk about facing issue and releasing it. They talk about being proactive and addressing these experiences. I also found hyperspace exercises continue to help me in my daily life feel better. I physically feel better and mentally better than I did 10 years ago. Thank you, Stuart and Janet. Here's the analysis. The case shows an extremely deep New World religion programming connected to Jehovah's Witness. There is a strong related programming that I see at Seventh-day Adventists also, Mormons, and Christian Scientists. All were developed as tests for the global religion for austerity, vegetarianism, and alternative sexual lifestyles, and total mind control. Basically, you are not allowed to think for yourself. It is ironic that after living such a restrictive life as a Jehovah's Witness, this woman, at only 20 years old, went of age with the man to a third world country and then traveled with a tour guide she did not know through the jungles and isolated areas, sleeping outside and taking a huge risk with her safety. She did this again years later by traveling to the Middle East for months at a time when the region is extremely unsafe, especially for a young female. This alone would constitute warrior programming as well as possible Viking programming, which is associated with bravery, disregard for safety, aggressiveness, fearlessness in adverse situations. This would indicate that her genetics contain a sequence for Viking times. Uh, which would also allow this to be entered. Remember, the programmers can only enter programs that can be accepted by the DNA of the slave. They cannot program a person with a function that is not at least latently within them. She states her grandparents were Ukrainian. It is known that Vikings were sent all the way to Kiev and founded the Russian Empire there. They were the Rus Vikings, who originated in Sweden now and colonized Eastern Europe. Their descendants are physically strong, mentally determined, and emotionally detached. These elements are key to certain types of programming functions and alters within the matrix. Knowing this woman, I am sure she would say that she is not strong or aggressive in any way. On the surface, it would appear so. However, she surpassed a great deal in life and was determined to see things through, which she did. Her actions in Central America and Middle East shows evidence of Viking DNA. She has been doing deprogramming work and DNA opening exercises, which have shown her pieces of her lineages and simultaneous existence. In them, there was an extremely courageous, determined, and even involved in espionage. The programmers look at the oversoul matrix as well as the types of personalities that could be programmed into the program matrix. The alters are for reasons and they are not for random. Living in Canada in the prairies is a life of international isolation. By that I mean that the cities and towns were far removed from the larger populated areas and have huge regions of emptiness around them. Deeply programmed people are placed in such regions to reduce their possibility of being premature triggered or activated. Also, the isolated cities provides testing ground away from too many prying eyes. The U.S. performed many medical and physical tests on the Canadian Prairie region during the 50s and 60s, even with the permission of the federal and provincial governments. Keep in mind, Canada has brought programming and mind control to North America even before the USA. This was accomplished by bringing the Scottish Doctor Ewan Cameron to Ontario and Quebec at the end of World War II. So he would experiment on patients in mental health clinics using captured Nazi documents and techniques were performed in concentration camps. I've outlined all this in my books. The subject of this case study was born in Canada during the 50s in a prairie province, the most opportune time for testing. Giving her genetics, there's no wonder she was chosen for experimentation because of the period of her birth. Her monarch and other programs were likely incomplete and fragmented, since North American programs were literally playing around with the targets of their work to see combinations would reveal what results. In other words, the targets were guinea pigs for mind control that was perfected at later Montauk projects later. The people with incomplete or fragmented programming grow older. Their original entries to the mind control are not updated. The programs break down and bleed through into the conscious mind, creating confusion, fear, nightmares, and physical health, relationship problems, and a host of other aspects in life. Fortunately, this individual is actively and proactively working on her issues. So that is one case of mind control. I will try to bring you more. Hope you enjoy. From 13 cubed squared. 13 cubed would be the first one. This is the second book of Program People's Lives. Have a nice day. Enjoy the day out of time.